So here's some guidelines and some housekeeping here. I tend to talk fast when I get going. I'll be out in front there. If you have any questions on a particular topic, ask them then. I'll stay later for questions all through lunch. I'm not eating lunch, it's a big breakfast. I'm not going to get into heavy specifics on monetary reform because Nick and Dean and Joe, they all do it better than I do. But I'm going to show you a little bit what I tell the common folk. I'm in the right area?
Yeah, just
I gotta be near the sheet for the introduction, okay? Because I can't remember everything anymore. Everything that I'm going to say today, just about everything is in my book. So if you didn't get a copy, it's at the back. It's a freebie. I want everybody to think global, not national. That's easy for this group. And I defend monetary reform and other things only on an economic basis. I don't talk about war or feelings or it might be valid or social justice or any of that. I defend it only on economics. Okay? Then you can bring in the others, and you want to do that. I want all this group of lefties to move a little bit right. When you see me, my book was really written for the right, and when I give my talks in front of the right, I'm known as Karl Marx. So you understand where you're coming from, okay? So we'll go right on to the first one. Let's see if I can do this right. Who is that?
Baxter.
Everybody know?
Baxter,
That's Baxter, okay? How much does Baxter cost?
40,000.
It cost $40,000. They've gone up. It started at 25, and in 2012, 2013, and he has a younger brother called Sawyer, who has one arm, and I'm sure he's cheaper. And during Moore's law, I'm sure they're going to get cheaper every year. Okay, and Baxter works very nicely with next to the person. And doesn't hurt them. That's the big thing. So it costs $4 an hour to operate Baxter with no coffee breaks, 24/7, no vacations, no human resources department, just the repairman who has to come by and help him out, and that repairman in the future will be a robot. Okay. So Baxter is important because, and they're going to waterproof Baxter, and it'll eventually pick the rice that the billion people grow around the world. So the robotic age is coming, and we're going to talk about it and have the solutions for it because it's geared to monetary reform. In the Imperial Valley, these are they're starting the robotic systems to replace the Mexican farm workers. So everybody's worried about the Mexican immigrants. We've got the machines coming, and they're already implemented 2 already. And it's just starting. Your Mexican gardeners, they're gone. Half of them are gone. They're just going to get a robot, and so we don't need them either. Here's the robotic trucks. These are the industrial trucks. And look at that worker telling the robot what to do. Okay? And it's all coming. No more truck drivers. Here's the automatic truck with no truck driver, and there'll just be fleets of these going with a security vehicle and a repair vehicle with maybe a human on board. So we got 1 million of those people we got to worry about. The one up on the right is the short order cook robot that is coming to market already. This will replace all those short order cooks. And we've got hundreds of thousands of them. There's the guy serving the McDonald's type thing. There's my new car. Okay. I only buy Mercedes. Anybody know why? Did I tell anybody why I only buy Mercedes? The dealership's across the street, and I don't like to do anything to get there. Okay. If it was a Chevy, I'd buy a Chevy. This is my next car. Because when I'm 80, I won't be able to drive much anyway, and this is the new self-driving Mercedes car. A couple of things I don't have. Let's go next. Adidas. Adidas has a plant in China, employs over 1,000 people. They're building a plant in Germany that employs 160, basically robotic, and they plan on building the same plant in the United States. So the first people, believe it or not, that are going to be hit by this robotic age is probably going to be China, because that's where the manufacturing is, isn't it? And it's going to be Mexico and the third world. There's another one, 3D process, okay? All right, I'm missing a slide here. I didn't go over that slide, so let me, did I miss a slide here? Disappeared? There it is. The AI, robotics, 3D printing, nanomanufacturing, and biotech. And I accumulate my Economist magazines and then read them when I travel. And I got a new one here. They're now building a plant in New Jersey to grow leather. So all those tanners and the pollution with tanners, and the quality of the leather is better than the animal because they produce it perfectly. And they've already contracted with the clothing people to start using it. So we don't need those animals for their hides anymore. Okay, that's biotechnology. Anybody want to read it? I got it here. Okay. Also, which been working on for some time, is there is a robot to replace those sweatshop workers that do the sewing, like in Bangladesh, and we still have some here. They've already almost perfected that, and you can imagine. So the big question is, we know a lot about robotics, and the world unemployment right now is massive if you count the subsistence farmers and fishermen in China and India moving to the city looking for jobs. We probably have 2 billion people that really don't work. What are we going to do? Okay, now the solution. My book is a solutions book. What are we going to do? Okay, what if people really get a lot out of their job? I mean, some people don't like it, but if some people, it's their meaning of their life, they want to do something. These are the industries of the future because the robots are going to make all the goods and services we need, or grow the services we need. Travel, people are going to travel more. We're going to be involved in culture. Look what Jim's doing. He's going off into meditation somewhere and, and doing all that stuff. That's what we're going to do, self-improvement, physical, mental, and spiritual. Entertainment. Entertainment's going to be a boom industry. Sports, research, exploration, education, exploration of the oceans and space. And most of you know I'm a Trekkie. So we're going out there, okay? And environmental cleanup, which is a big one. If you read the preface of my book, it'll show you how we can clean up the oceans. The solution is freeing up money. Yeah, I get into explaining where money comes from. I'm going to go through fast here. You know this, and where it comes from. And deficit spending is the secondary source. And the national debt is not really a debt. And Joe didn't like when I said that it's not a debt, so I changed it in my book and I said monetary. It's a monetary debt, a monetary account debt. Because we haven't paid it off since 1835, as most of you know, during Jackson's administration. If you don't pay it off, it's not really a debt. You all know the Constitution. Okay, this is the key things. Money is not scarce. The cost of creating it, not distributing it, is zero, except for inflation. I'm going to talk about inflation because that's the objection we get. Cost of distribution is low. There's 3 ways of distributing, not creating, distributing money. Direct spending by the government into circulation, loan it into the economy, we talked a little bit about, and investing it in the economy. And there's a book in there, and I can't pronounce her name, it's an Italian name, but most of the high-risk venture investing in this country is done by the government because the venture capitalists don't want to take the risk at that level. So all these companies that you see, Google, Apple, they all receive pretty good government funds to do their research. Creation has to be a government process, you know this, with checks and balances, using the legislative, executive, and new independent branch controlled by inflation statistics, okay, and asset bubbles. See, a little bit broader than the NEED Act. I'm giving you a little bit different than the NEED Act. Distribution can be mostly a private enterprise process using at least 10 or more systems. These are the systems. Now, I call them distribution systems, you can call them banks, okay? And I'll give you examples, I'll go through quick, and they're all in my book, so I don't even have to monitor. But what we want to do is we want to put as much money out there as possible before excess inflation to solve all our problems, to pay for all the people. And the way you do it is have diversity. And the way you put it out, and different systems run by private enterprise. You see I'm bringing in the right here, because the NEED Act will never be passed. Because everybody said, oh, look, it's all more government spending, you see? So this is bringing in the right into the NEED Act. Once we get it resubmitted, we can bring in the right. Okay, government spending, I talked about primary housing. Every person should get a 1 or 2% fixed loan for their initial primary house. Everyone, if they can afford it. If you can't afford a 1 or 2%, 30 or 40-year fixed loan, okay, or even 3%, you should rent. Environmental bank solves our environmental problems. You read that out of the book. Venture capital bank. Here's where you get the government gets a return in equity, in stock, rather than interest, okay? And there's a couple pages of that on my book. It's very important to wait, and it's a small area of money where you can get money to venture capitalists and create businesses on an equity basis. Then no debt service, and they can survive longer. And we have more companies and more employment. So there's a very important area. Land and infrastructure bank, okay? I gave the government can buy land and sell land, but the infrastructure bank, and we talked about a few others out here, instead of doing a grant, let's say I'm going to have a bridge or a freeway with a toll. So a road really doesn't go away, so I can have a 100-year mortgage for my money at 1% to the government instead of a direct grant. Then I can put more money out there, and the payment might be 10 cents on every toll that comes through that. And maybe it's only $1 or $2 toll, so it keeps it inexpensive. So the infrastructure bank, everybody's talking about infrastructure. And of course, the environmental bank is, I give the illustration in the book, that the entire LA basin, none of the industrial buildings have solar on it, because I fly over and I look for them, and I fly a lot. So I found 3. And we probably have 100 or 150,000 big enough. Forget the houses, they're putting on the solar on the little houses. So what? So the way to do that, if you create a 1% loan for 30 years, that they don't start paying for 30 days and nothing down, and 30 days after operation, the owners of the buildings will be around the block, because the payment to the mortgage is much lower than their power bill, and they have money left over to sell back, power left over to sell back, and money left over for maintenance, okay? And it's not a grant. It's not tax money. It's not in the fiscal budget. It's just money, which costs nothing to create, except for excess inflation. So those are my prime examples real quick. They're all in the book. Student loan bank, microfinance banks, nonprofit cultural bank. We're going to really need this as we have to build the cultural, because nobody's going to be working very much. We have stuff that we need to do, a 75-year, 1% to a museum to build. It costs 25 cents for the tuition to go in, because it's a long-term mortgage. Agriculture bank, global government spending, public banking. That's about food stamp bank. I listed 30 reasons, and you should go over those reasons why we should have monetary reform. Yeah, it's a couple a little redundant, but it includes distribution, but there's 30 reasons in my book. And if you want to promote it, you should really read those. Here's the big one where we get the question, and I'll spend a little time on inflation. Told you I was going to go fast. Diversity of monetary delivery systems, which I just talked about. The more systems we have out there, the way they put it out with debt and line, the more I can put out there, because it controls inflation, okay? And if you put it out on one thing, like the current banks put out all their loans, 70% of their loans are mortgages. And you see what happened in '08 when they put it out all on mortgages. It just creates a big bubble and collapse. So the monetary authorities have to watch out for asset bubbles. We encourage production and productivity. Reduction of high interest rate charges, which is the cost of doing business, and it places upward pressure on prices. So by trying to control, as we did in the early 80s, control the system through interest rates and raising interest rates, it's a cost to business and they raise prices. Well, with monetary reform, the interest rates are always low relatively, and it keeps prices in check. That's number 3. These are all protocols. Encourage savings and investing in rather than overconsumption to control commodities. In other words, you need to save for the future. Encourage spending on personal service rather than spending on goods, right? No inflationary factor there. Having the Commerce Department continue to create and publish for transparency an array of inflation statistics from many formulas based on asset prices, goods and services, with and without the price of oil, which is the main kicker for inflation in the 70s. Have many checks and balances in the creation distribution of money in the federal government. That's just 7, I'm still going. This is how important the objection is, okay? Voters will be able to cast their votes on the inflationary management of the country. Right now, the politicians, as we know, are not in charge of the economy, money is, okay? If inflation takes off, it's really the monetary authority, and they can vote, say, hey, I'm gonna control this. And so it's a factor in their voting. Currency markets should be monitored in the long term to help control any excess inflation. Increasing taxation removes money from the system. And remember, monetary reform to the right lowers taxes. Big issue, okay? Big issue on the right. Competition usually keeps upward spirals of prices to check, section 3 of my book, okay? Substantially encourage the 5 R's, and I added one. Reuse, repairable, renew, regenerate, and recycling to reduce the pressures of raw materials, commodities on the environment. Eliminate fractional reserve banking. It's inflationary, as we talked about. Trade deficits can be very detrimental to the value of a country's currency, so you have to be careful of trade deficits. And in the beginning of my book, I said, well, how do you accomplish that when you have such a big surplus? Well, because money costs nothing to do. For instance, we have a $1 billion surplus. China just sends back our money free. Because what are we going to do? We're going to buy it back anyway. So you don't want to starve these other countries. And the concept of money is money. It's, it's just a digital thing. And so they should develop a statistical formula that if I have a massive trade deficit, I just send back some money to that country. Okay? So they don't collapse their currency because they cause hyperinflation. Okay? Selling treasury bonds, remember we pay it off with 0 coupon, but we can still sell some. And it keeps the money supply in check. Okay. Those are the 15 protocols to eliminate excess inflation. People say inflation, and they say, I prefer 0 inflation. That's human perfection. Socialism and libertarianism, that's human perfection. Sorry to say, guys, but we're not perfect, okay? So we want to have a range. 1 is too low because we're going to screw up and go into depression and go into 1% deflation. We want around 2, just what the Fed does now. It depends how they do it. So we want about 2 to 4. 4 is getting a little too high. 2 is where it is, because if we get too low, it goes in reverse. So it'll be in that range, hopefully 0 to 4. Preparing for the robotic age while creating more customers and solving inequality. My definition of inequality is different with the formal guys. They think that if I'm equal, that they're so rich up there, okay, and that I'm so poor, that's inequality. That's not inequality to me, okay? Inequality to me is I want to make sure that my customers are well taken care of. I want them healthy, wealthy, and wise, okay? I want their health care, their food, everything, their education, everything taken care of, okay? And that's inequality to me. I want more customers, quality customers. You're going to read that in section 2, okay? So what do we do? Okay, pretty simple. We're going to, after monetary reform, we're going to gradually reduce the work week because The robots are going to be doing a lot. Okay? AI and 3D printing and nano manufacturing, which hasn't even started yet. Gradually increase the guaranteed vacation and personal time off. Provide food stamps for all. Food stamps is money. They get a credit card and you go buy your food. Everybody gets it. They want to reduce it. I want everybody to get it. See what happens when you free up money? Everybody. Now the 1%ers, okay, and you shouldn't really attack the 1%ers because I'm in the 1%. You want to attack the 1/10 of 1%ers. Because the difference between me and them is so much more than the difference between me and at the bottom, okay? So you gotta want, the taxation really's gotta come in the 1/10, 2/10, 3/10. Those guys are really rich. And of course they can't spend that money. Free schooling from preschool to graduate school. Provide a stipend for residential assistance. Provide a stipend for miscellaneous purchases like transportation and clothing. It's called universal income, which has been around a while. Pay most healthcare costs, dental, physical, this is increased, mental, including addictions and nursing home care. Okay? And then you've got your basic survival. And you do it gradually. You can't do it all at once because it'll create bubbles and asset inflation.
Can I just ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So at the beginning of your presentation, you said think globally, not nationally.
Yes.
Now, these solutions that you're presenting, are those global solutions?
Absolutely.
That everybody in the world will have reduced work weeks?
Everybody in the world.
will have healthcare?
Everybody in the world.
So where will they make the robots?
Where do you care? Okay, initially they're going to be, we're competing because there's still a wealth above the survival basis. So China right now, China, US, who's the other country that's really up? I think it's Japan. There's the three of us that are really leading in this arena. So what we're doing is put their employees out of business. But we got to do it for the rest of the world because what happens when these guys get unemployed around the world? Okay? What happens when they have no money because they're not working? We got to decouple jobs from money. Okay, what happens? They pick up a gun. Okay? And it's all over for us rich guys because they're going to come get our stuff. I don't want them to come get our stuff. Okay? I want them to be taken care of so they can buy more of my stuff that I'm selling. Okay? Made by robots.
It can be done in one country at a time though, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're human beings, I can't figure out which way it's going to go. And it's all going to be done gradually because you can't do it overnight. We'll wait to the end now. We'll have a long discussion, okay? Because I want to get in and finish it. We can discuss it, implementation in a minute. I'm an implementer boy, I'm not a theorist. Okay. Countries with cash income payments. Kind of interesting, huh? Been going on for a while. They take it out of the fiscal budget, of course. They don't take it out of the monetary system. Most of them are payments to kids. Most of them are payments to kids. All right, now we're not going to go into any questions, but we're gonna talk about a couple other things in my book. Okay, but I need my notes because I can't remember things. And this has to Paul Craig Roberts, he talked about in the book to read for him, because we're all interested in economics in this thing, is The Death of Laissez-Faire Capitalism. It's probably it doesn't have monetary reform in it, but it's a great book and it's not long. The Death of Laissez-Faire Capitalism. And why did Hillary lose? And why did Trump come up and Bernie come up? What's the main reason? Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of other reasons why they lost and all that stuff. But what's the main reason? Because it's economics. Okay? The main reason is called free trade. Okay? And not in the correct definition of free trade. Okay? And Paul Craig Roberts came up with it. Outsourcing jobs is not trade. Okay? And other than, who knows Ricardo? He goes over why Ricardo was wrong. Who was a banker, a bond trader in 1776. Okay? So we have to be careful on this trade definition. And the reason is, over the last 20 years, through the all the white male jobs went away. And when they go away, okay, they become not only a ward of the state, but they're a ward of their families. So they're more voters, okay? And if you can't get a job to buy anything, you're gonna be upset people. And they're not in control, you know, the Clintons weren't in control, and that's what they're voting. That's why Trump came up, and that's why Bernie came up. Okay? Because they've lost all their jobs. Now, jobs are dying now anyway. So, and we're gonna be better off here than the other countries, in my opinion. So, the thing when you look at, one of the sections of my book is recirculation versus redistribution. I hate redistribution. It is a terrible word, okay? Because when we circulate money from the wealthy, they spend it right back in the wealthy's business. I get richer. So it's recirculation of the money, not redistribution. Remember on the right, they always talk about redistribution. It's not redistribution. Those guys are not made poor by the taxing system. They get to people that don't have money, they spend it right back in my business and I get richer. I make more profits. So that's a big factor. So remember trade, outsourcing jobs is not trade. So I have a chapter in there, I've labeled it quality customer minimum wage. You see what happens is the business right, I call them the business right, that are Republicans on the right or independent on the right, and they're always thinking in micro instead of macro. And the word employee and labor is a micro term. The same for the same people as customer, client, consumer, and this is the only non-economic term I use, but you'll get the idea, and citizen, okay? And you've got to take care of those people. It's up to the leaders, because the people with the gold, it's a golden rule, people with the gold make the rules, okay? More so now than, it's always been that way. People with the gold make the rules. Well, they're making the wrong rules. And it's to their harm. They would be even richer if they made the right rules. The other thing I came up with is that business cycle is, there's no such thing as a business cycle for an entire country. It's a monetary cycle. Business cycle is for an individual product or industry. It's a micro term, but the macro is no such thing, okay? Because the entire one business might be booming, the other's not. The countries go down. And that's what got me started in monetary reform. I did a little advisory work in Japan, and nobody outworks the Japanese. I mean, they're industrial might, and all of a sudden they crash. And I got curious in '90, why in the world did they crash? How could that possibly be? Their firms didn't go, well, what's going on? And then I started reading and researching, and it was all the monetary system. Destroyed that country, and they haven't really recovered yet in GDP terms. But in the quality of life of the consumer and their people at the bottom, although they've hurt them a little bit, it's still not a bad place to live if you're Japanese. They've got universal health care, they have to live in smaller places, geography, they have free education, they got a lot of stuff for people. They have a robotic hotel, where you go in and the person at the front desk is a robot and the bellman is a robot, okay? Because they don't have labor there. The sale of Depends is larger than the sale of diapers in Japan. So the senior citizen is far outweighing the children, so they don't have enough labor, but it's easy for them, they just build the robots now. And they don't allow immigrants. So that's a couple areas. Other areas that it's important, I covered every topic that I could think of in section 5. So if you want to talk about taxes, and I figured out corporate taxes and individual taxes, and we can talk about all the other economic systems, because I didn't want to, I prefer question and answers rather than me sitting and lecturing. Then I can get to exactly what you want to talk about. And I'm here. There you go, Mark.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but first one is on the different banks you're talking about.
Yeah.
different banks you're talking about setting up, are those banks set up privately, or are they incentivized by the government in some way? You had
Well, the
10 or 15 different
current,
banks.
let's start with the current banking system. The current banking system is basically set up by the government, okay? And their loan restrictions are loan restrictions of the government. So I perceive that the government would issue how they're gonna distribute the money, the new money, and we would have private brokerage like a mortgage broker. The banks would take part, new companies would take part, and they would be licensed with certain worth. They would get their allocation of money, and they would put it out there according to the government's guidelines. So they would be private brokers. But the current banking system would also put it out, okay? See how it becomes win-win? They're gonna be one of the main distributors of this new money, okay? Because I gotta make a win-win, because the banking system is the most powerful non-military institution in the history of the world. And if you're gonna try to improve it, you gotta say, okay, you're gonna make more money with my system and you're not gonna collapse, okay? And that's why I would keep some sort of FDIC insurance out, because it's great for the average person, but it's good for the banks. And so banks would still be funded by the people that, when we don't have treasuries, the people that want to move to the American banking system would move right in and insure deposits. Next, Sue.
This might be a little facetious, but I think there's some truth behind it. Are these robots going to have sex with each other?
Yeah, well, I didn't mention this, that, it's a good question, I'm glad you brought it up. In an article reading on the plane just coming over today, there's an MIT professor that is linking the robot, okay, with the human through brain attachments to the human, to the robot. So first they're developing that the robot can tell the human when he makes a mistake. Now this sounds real science fiction, okay, but this is true stuff, okay, at MIT. Then they're going to develop where the human is going to be able to tell the robot that they made a mistake, because they work side by side, and they're doing this with Baxter, okay? So it's very interesting. So, but they're going to have robots building robots. Robots are going to do the repairs. It's just like in the Terminator series and Matrix. We're not going to have to do too much, especially next century. We're just going to have a lot of fun. That's what we're going to do, if we do it right. Yeah, there's another question.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up.
Okay.
I'm going to have a lot of trouble because I have trouble when I want to call customer service and I don't get a person. And I get really frustrated. My friends get really frustrated. I want a human world. I don't want to walk into a store and not have a person there to talk to.
The reason they have a robot.
It's just like,
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, back in the 1500s or 1600s, the diggers, you know, like no one is thinking of us humans. They're just thinking of their money.
There's going to be a future job is that those service people, or those robot service people, computers, that'll be a future job because everybody else is replaced by the robot, so the initial human contact might be a human. And so he'll be the one employee, and he works his 20 hours a week. He's getting all his benefits anyway, and that gets his money and extra money. And we're not taking away incentives. You still have to work in order to get the extra stuff. That's what the right says. They're worried about, you know, disincentivizing the starving worker. Okay, so we can adjust to that as we're going, but it's a more micro question than a macro question. Yes?
I'm wondering, as a reporter for American Free Press and other outlets, I've studied social credit, AMI programs, I've looked at all the different ideas out there over the last 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked into the findings of Major Douglas, who kind of conceived social credit? One of the important things that I think he got right is that in each costing cycle, the prices and the debts outpace the wages and salaries that the system creates. Therefore, there's a built-in defect that needs to be offset by extra money, like you say, not all of it tied to employment.
Right.
But what him and people that followed him said in the social credit movement was that we could have something a little more simple than what you're proposing but I haven't read your book yet, to be fair. And that's a national credit office that would basically have a ledger of production and consumption and would automatically pay out a dividend largely directly to the people in the amount that purchasing power is falling short of prices.
It's a way of measuring the universal income.
Yeah, and I'll just add the caveat that it's not redistribution of tax money, but it's
No,
new money
it's new money.
created, not enough to inflate too much, but also to avoid this deflation that we're often in now because of interest rate. You know,
I
everything
don't-
is a loan following a loan following a loan following a loan.
I look at it a little bit, tiny bit different in terms of employment. I look at, I look at it globally. We got 2 billion people in here that basically in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years that don't do anything. We don't need them to make all our goods and services. We don't need them now, okay? So we're definitely not gonna need them in the future. So we're gonna put those people to work socially, and they will receive a salary for it from free money. So I'll go to work on if you read the opening of my book, I'll go on to work on the new oil tanker that was converted to a trash collector that's going out to sea, and I'm gonna go for a month, and I'll be in the crew, and I'll be trained. I'll go for the month to clean up the Pacific Ocean, okay? Or I might serve on a hospital ship in Africa, because there's shorter doctors right now, or a water ship, okay? Or any other social thing, or clean up the environment, or go on to space. See, I'm not worried about making a living to eat, okay? I'm worried about what I want to do. And all these opportunities will open up because we have the capital to make it open up. And some will be government directed and some will be private directed. You don't want to lose the incentive of the private system, because if you look back in history, and I know you guys are like, if you really look back in history, the average person who lives in, I do because I'm an LA guy, South Central, okay? That had a little job and it lives 100% better than the average person in 1800, okay?